Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. How are you doing? I'm your host, Ray Harkins. Thank you for joining us, me, our guest, and just hanging out. I'm looking forward to bringing you this conversation that I had. It is with a gentleman named Dave Quiggle. He is I would say, a veteran of the hardcore and punk scene. He has done artwork for a cajillion bands, undoubtedly recognizes his stuff. He is a very prolific person. He also works at Face Down Records. He's just done a lot of stuff. I was really excited to talk to him. So more on him in a minute because it's a funny story. There is some people that are donating to the show, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. But there are some people that I wanted to highlight who have tossed some recent reviews on iTunes, because I notice other podcasts do this, and I like that because it's nice to kind of see what sort of feedback people give. I just like to kind of spread the love, so to speak. And a dude or a girl named Big City Hutch, I think they're from the States. He said that I love the range and diversity of guests. So thanks, Big City Hutch. Shout out to you. And shout out to Fantastopotamus, which is a spectacular username on the iTunes store. I think he's from Canada. He said, great guests. If you love like 90s and 2000s sort of punk, hardcore, independent culture, this is up your alley. So thank you for the reviews. If you want to review and kind of join in on this fun stuff, go to the iTunes store, drop some stars, type some sentences. It helps the rankings, it helps the legitimacy of the show, and it's a great thing in general. PropertyofZach.com are great media partners, and email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. I bring a person occasionally to recommend you the finest in musical outputs, and his name is Dave Anthony. He writes for a website called the AV Club, which is one of my favorite destinations on the internet in regards to music and movies and television. Anything you need an opinion on, go there and you will find out about it and figure out whether or not it fits into your life. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Dave. And this is Dave Anthony, not Dave Quiggle, where Dave Anthony and I discuss two records, and you should check them out. So here we are, and I'll talk to you afterwards about Dave Quiggle, and then we'll go into the interview. Yeah, let's talk records if you're down.
Let's do it. I'm totally down.
We'll start with the Meatwave record that you sent me. I'll give you my impression, and then you can fill in the sort of biographical information, because I love when we're trading emails talking about the records that we want to cover, and you always not only usually suggest a Chicago band, but also are like, I guess we should talk about this because they're from Chicago.
Well, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a product of my environment and like don't fucking love Chicago bands and like kind of always root for them. But they were top of mind just because like at one of the million free street fests that happened over the summer here, like they played one last week, like opening for like Guided by Voices and Cheap Girls. Mm-hmm. And over the past year, like they've just gotten progressively better and better every time I've seen them. And, they got some buzz here and have been in other projects, but the self-titled like tape they put out last year just got pressed on vinyl. And I think it's a killer record, and I feel like now is as good a time as any to bring it up. So I'm really interested to hear what you think of a band that like has just kind of been kicking around for a while and like I've quietly and slowly fallen in love with over the past year and a half.
Yeah, no, I see the charm in it, because it definitely, as they self-describe, just sort of a garage punk band. But it's like, to me, that genre is so loosely defined, because there's bands that, their recordings sound purposefully awful. But it's properly defined as lo-fi.
Well, that's one of my biggest things. Like a lot of like garagey stuff, it has to be done well. When a band's just like caked in reverb and it sounds like, the vocalist is underwater, like it's so alienating to me. So when a band can do that kind of garagey indie punk or what have you and not sound like they're fucking ambivalent to what they're doing, you win a lot of points with me.
You and I are in agreement with that. And these dudes like definitely fall into that category of like, okay, it's appropriately recorded, but not too slick to where it's like, it just sounds like every other sort of guitar driven record. It's like the note I wrote, it's like, it's garagey, but not in the sloppy way. I got feelings, even though they weren't as sort of angsty or a band like Hot Snakes, like that sort of like driving guitar stuff, but not like I said, not as driving, but I really enjoyed it. I mean, you're 1,000% so far because I know you're doing good, but it's kind of part of your job, right? So don't.
I mean, I'd like to think like it's one of those things where, I mean, I hope I recommend things to people that they would actually like. That's one of my, for years and years and years, like in high school and through college, like I love just being like, oh, you like this and this? Well, like listen to this, and I think you'll like it. But on the flip side, like I really enjoy when people do that with me. But there are certain times where you're like, I have to cut this motherfucker off because like it's just like so bad.
Yeah,
I can't do it anymore.
totally. Yeah, but no, I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was it's basically it's for people that will that like stuff like the new Menzinger's record and like Dillinger 4, but want a little dirtier edge to it, even though both of those bands obviously have that element as well. But yeah,
for sure.
I don't know, it was a great balance between all those different worlds.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Hot Snakes, because like in a lot of write-ups, like and I've seen them like reference, like, oh, we really like Hot Snakes. They were kind of an influence. But seeing them this past weekend and the last couple times I've seen them, like going back and listening to the rest of the record, I'm like, man, this is like poppy shellac. Like that's what really kind of hits me with it, where it's like it's got this kind of driving repetitiveness, and like the way the guy sings is just very acerbic, and even the lyrics, like in the song Brother, where he's like, you're not my brother, you're some other motherfucker's brother, like that's a Steve Albini line if I've ever heard one. And that's kind of what really has set in for me. I think recently when I first saw him, I was like, oh, kind of garage punk, indie punk, what have you. And then like all of a sudden, like seeing them like jam on some of the songs and play the new stuff, it was like, man, this is like if shellac was like not overly, like not super heavy, like really clean guitar tones that just cut through everything, but still have that kind of like, I mean, obviously very like Chicago style to them. Like they remind me of shellac, and seeing them live, it reminds me a lot of seeing Alkaline Trio in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Like they don't sound like them, but something about their performance like really takes me back to like seeing Alkaline Trio when I was a younger gentleman. So that's part of why I recommended it, is because it's like super fucking Chicago influenced, which I love. But I think they're kind of doing something that I think they're doing it in their own way. They aren't, using all the same reference points that you see again and again and again. And, even the new songs they played this past weekend, I was like, all right, I can't wait to hear these recorded, and I can't wait to see what the next step is for these dudes.
Yeah, no, I love that. You definitely hit on an interesting point in regards to like the Chicago sound, and like obviously Alkaline Trio, and it's like the images of the Fireside Bowl immediately come into my head, where it was like, oh yeah, like these dudes, not only would they have played out of sheer function because of that was the venue you played when it existed, but yeah, I could easily see some bands that exist within the certain context of a dependent scene. Don't translate to other cities or a more nationally appealing. Like there's that band from Louisville, the National Acrobat, where they were like, I saw them a few times in a few different cities across the country, and like the only place that they really did well was Louisville. Like every other place just kind of looked at them like, I don't know what you guys got going on. But
that's funny, because I feel that way. Like that's very true of Louisville. Like just in general, like a lot of bands out of there, can even have like decent national followings, like Coliseum, Young Widows, those type of bands. But like Louisville is where people go fucking nuts for them.
Yeah, true.
And it's just like there's something in the water there that like makes those bands sound a certain way, have a certain like outlook and viewpoint and aesthetic that doesn't always translate to places that maybe don't understand that region so specifically and so well.
Yeah, it's cool. Like I just like that point that you said, where it's like, yeah, they're very obviously Chicago influenced, and they're waving that banner high, but it's like it's not so limiting to where it's like, cool, you're literally only going to see us, in the Midwest and in the suburbs of this particular geographical location.
Well, and I promise next time I'll stop picking such like Midwest specific bullshit and like
I love it, because I mean it just shows personal interest, but it sometimes I think a lot of the context is stripped away from music as far as like where bands are located. Like I'm always, I think like the first or second question out of my mouth anytime anybody talks about a particular band, whether it's like, oh, should I sign this band or whatever, I'm always like, oh, where are they from? And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, they're from, wow, they're from Nova Scotia. It's like, well, that's interesting that they're creating that music devoid of having any sort of scene up there or whatever. It's like you always want to know where they're from.
I completely agree because, there's a lot of talk of how the internet has changed music and the importance of touring, this, that, and the other. And I do think to a degree it allows bands to bring in new influences, but there is something just very honest and true about a band that is influenced from where they're from. Like, I think where you're from does make a difference on how you sound to a degree. It doesn't necessarily inform it entirely, but I do think it plays a role that still shines through even in this internet digital age.
Yeah, totally. And I've had recent conversations with people in regards to, certain particular bands where it's easy for band members to be located all across the country now. The ease of writing over the internet, like all that stuff's awesome. But then it does, if a band's origin is not tied to one geographical location and everybody's kind of spread all over the place, you do feel this kind of sort of like faceless identity that is rooted in a band, and like you can totally tell where it's like whatever, even a band like La Dispute whose members live all over the place now, their origins were from a very specific place, and that that still influences their sound today, whereas other bands like that start like, oh, this dude lives in Southern California and this dude lives in Florida, and like they're just together to play, and you definitely lose a little bit of that.
Yeah, and not to completely go down this tangent, but like I think it can be really telling when a band does lose it, or is just kind of like when you're playing with someone, it's fucking great the first time you kick into a new song, and like even if it's not a great song, you're just stoked on it. And I think a lot of bands that do kind of spread out, not all of them, but I think some of them do falter, like coming back together. They're just so like jazzed to play with one another that it doesn't really matter what they're playing. Mm-hmm. And I think it's harder, but I think it also, it does make it easier. There are great projects that come out of relationships and bands that are formed that way. And on the flip side, sometimes it doesn't work, but I just think it makes it more interesting because location matters, and it also kind of doesn't.
The damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of thing. But it's like when you do have a band that you feel that attachment and that sound develop from an area, it's like you can't help but smile, or it's like, oh, that's great. I see. Oh, that's cool. That's where they're from. I kind of heard that. I didn't know that they were from there exactly.
For sure. So now I want to switch into your record because it's one I was also thinking of suggesting. Mm-hmm. It's the new White Lung Deep Fantasy. Were you or are you a fan of that band? Like prior to this record, were they on your radar?
Yeah, I was. I got clued into them. I want to say it was like around 2-ish or so years ago, maybe a little prior to that. But it was around the release of their last one, which I think was Sorry, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Sorry was the last one.
Yeah, on Deranged. And it's just a friend of mine that I used to work with at various record labels. He lived in Seattle and was like, hey, I saw these guys and I just think that you would be into them. And it was one of those things, like I trust his opinion, but I just didn't immediately check it out. And then 2 weeks later, I finally got around to listening to it. And, it's one of those moments where you're like, God, I'm an idiot for not listening to this sooner. Like, this is incredible. It's just, that weird amalgamation of, punk, indie rock, but played by females really aggressively. Like there's just so many things that it resonated with me, and so I immediately fell head over heels in love with that record. Actually, Mish, the vocalist, she was an early guest on this podcast. She was actually the first female I interviewed for the podcast.
Really?
Yeah, which I felt good about.
Oh, she's a really fascinating person, like band or no band, like with how much writing she's done, like even as the band was kind of starting to get going. And I just think she has a very interesting perspective in song and then just outside of that.
Oh, totally. And one of my favorite moments of that particular interview was the fact that I compared them to Pretty Girls Make Graves, and she immediately was like, oh yeah, I fucking hate that band. And I was like, oh, cool. Glad I mentioned that.
I love shit like that though, because like I was thinking of it when we were talking about Meatwave, and I was like, I wonder if me comparing them to Alkaline Trio would have them go like, oh, cool, or be like, oh, dude, fuck, man, And I find that kind of stuff interesting because with White Lung, the one comparison I always go back to with the way Mish sings, and this is something I've said to a lot of people who are like, dude, you're out of your mind. but the way she phrases her lines, the way she like pairs her voice with the music and the way she presents it reminds me so much of Davey Havok.
Oh, yeah.
It's just like da 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 da, and like it's that kind of like very like elongated endings of vocal phrases, very punchy words leading up to it, like 4 or 5 words and then an elongated like kind of woey thing.
Yeah.
That like since I first heard them, I was like, they don't sound like AFI as a band, but the way she puts her words together and her lines reminds me so much of early AFI.
Yeah, great comparison. But yeah, I think what made me want to pick this record for us to discuss was just, it's obviously hard to improve on a sound that you kind of come out the gates sort of doing well.
Yeah.
And that's what I think was impressive about this record, where it's like, it's not drastically different than their last one, but in the production value, in just kind of the way that the tightness of the band just seems to kind of, edged up a bit, where it's like, I think because of that and the production, where it made the record all that more impactful, because those little minor improvements, it's like, oh yeah, I got a 95% on this test. And it's like, but man, you getting a 98% on that test, like that was a huge difference. It made it made all the difference.
Well, and that's the thing too, is like I really love Sorry, and I loved the record before, not as much, but this new one, it didn't hit me at first because it was kind of what I expected. Right. But once I really like sat with it and like listened to it with headphones, did the whole thing, I was just so impressed with how subtly technical it is. Like some of those guitar riffs, I'm like, what are you doing?
Totally.
I don't know how you play this fast and make it sound this aggressive when you're playing these intricate like single note surf riffs throughout. And it's something that once it hit, it just really stuck with me, how impressive and how quickly they can accomplish something in like 10 songs in 22 minutes. Just, they get in, they don't fuck around, but they're still doing something that is, really unlike a lot of other people in hardcore, punk, whatever you want to call it.
Wholeheartedly agree. It's definitely, it's as simple as possible with as far as the approach is concerned, but insanely technical in their musical delivery. I think you could play this for like anybody that is familiar with independent music in general, and they're going to have that same sort of like visceral reaction of just like, wait, who is this? It's like, yeah, it's that perfect record store record where if you're working at the record store, you put on and you're, no matter what, you're going to have at least 1 or 2 people come up to you and be like, hey, what is this you're playing?
Oh, exactly. And like, it's such a fucking honest record. There's no pretension to this band, which, as punk and hardcore becomes a little more accepted and a little more popular, you see these bands like popping up on bigger festivals. Like, I don't think they've really lost their heart, and I don't think they've lost that perspective. I'm not saying that's something that always happens with bands, but, it is a concern when a band goes from like talking about, shit that's a little off kilter and kind of having their own approach and then gets this acceptance. And I think they've made these logical steps, and I'm just glad there's a band like them who is really unrelenting. Like they don't, throw a ballad in midway through a record. They just hit you and they continue to hit you until it's over. And I have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that's a perfect cherry on top of the musical recommendation Sunday, as it were. So thank you. For
sure. Well, we've been agreeing so much. I feel like next time I need to pick something you're gonna absolutely hate.
I know. Maybe we should make that a theme for the next round, where it's like we'll both actively try to stretch, like go into our dark corners of like, all right, dude. A lot of people think that I'm crazy for liking this. So yeah, let's bum each other out next time.
All right, I'm into it. Sign me up.
Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it.
All right, pleasure, Ray. Take care.
All right. Thank you very much, Dave Anthony. I really appreciate him wanting to contribute and hang out. And I hope you enjoy it, because I do get feedback from people saying, hey, I love recommendations. I love being pointed in directions of cool stuff to check out. So there may be a future bonus episode with a other contributor that I have done some stuff with before. His name's Scott Arnold, a very good friend of mine, and he has very eclectic tastes, and he is a man of the world. So yeah, there may be a bonus episode for those of you that just absolutely adore recommendations and cool stuff to check out. So anyways, Dave Quiggle, he lives about an hour and a half away from me, And the reason I mentioned that is because we were corresponding. He initially was like, thanks for the offer, but I don't know if I really, not that he didn't want to do this, but that he just didn't feel comfortable. I could tell there was some hesitation. He was nice about it, but he was like, I don't know about this. Then I was like, dude, I'll come out to you. It'll be fun. You'll enjoy it. I promise. Because usually, I mean, I'm a person that, I'll talk to anybody. If anybody's like, hey, I'll do an interview or whatever, I'm like, sure. I honestly don't really give two thoughts into it besides the fact I'm like, oh, okay, this is a legitimate person asking for an interview or whatever. So Dave, he is a very private and introverted person. So it was really interesting when I first showed up at his house and he invited me in. He kind of started to, reveal to me, he's like, hey, I'm really nervous about this. And not in a, oh man, I don't know what I'm going to say to you, that sort of stuff. But just in a, he coming from I could tell a very sort of, insecure, deep rooted thing. And it was really interesting for me to talk with him because honestly, once he revealed that to me, I was really like, oh, wow, okay. I need to make sure that I am, doing my due diligence as the interviewer to not put him in a position where he feels, uncomfortable, stupid, whatever. After the conversation, it was like, oh, do you see, Dave, you didn't need to be worried about that. And I also felt better because I felt like I accomplished something in regards to ushering a person through a technically uncomfortable experience for them. So it was great. I just had to share that sort of background because it was a very interesting thing that Dave put out there. And honestly, I really appreciate the fact that he told me that he put himself out there like this. So anyways, Dave is a great guy, an amazing artist, tattoo artist, works at Face End Records. I'll let him do the talking. Here he is.
Of doing something because it's like this was actually something I was going to address, and we're recording now, but
okay,
this was something I was going to address where because you are artists in general, when I'm talking about artistry, not like playing in bands,
sure,
are the typical sort of connotation is that like you're shut in, like, oh yeah, you're just sitting here and like you are a self-proclaimed introvert.
Yeah.
And so from everybody that's ever known or that I've spoken to in all my dealings with you, you've been, professional and nice, and like, has it been something you've had to like learn how to be sociable?
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
For sure. Well, for one thing, I usually just love, friends, family, people
right.
I know. But when you mean sociable, like social media and stuff like that, I'm petrified of it. I only do it because I have to.
Right. It's like a function of the business.
Yeah.
Sure.
I would be on Facebook just to creep on all my friends and, oh, how are they doing?
Yeah.
How's my grandma? And
sure,
all this
right.
stuff. But I have no interest of posting like, here's what I ate or any of that kind of stuff, But I feel like I have to. Like, okay, I'm an artist. If people are going to be interested in my art, it's just logical. I have to put it out there.
Right. So that's social media. I could see where like that's. I mean, because you can never calculate for these things in advance,
right.
And then it comes, and then you're like, well, I guess I have to adapt and like
right.
figure out how this medium will be appropriately used for what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I have that analysis paralysis thing where if I have an opinion on any subject, even not a hot button issue or anything, just what's better, bacon or ham, or, any kind of like pie or cake. And I'll be like, I don't want to say pie because all my friends who hate pie will be mad at me, and it's all irrational and doesn't make any sense.
Has that been like who you are, like throughout, like has that been a thread that's been constant in your life?
Not really, because with my actual, analog reality friends, I have no problem expressing opinions, and it's just that whole, forums,
once it's sure,
and people misrepresenting and that kind of stuff just paralyzes me, sort of. So.
That's interesting because it's like obviously with all the music you've done and the Disciple, like that couldn't be further from the truth,
right?
Exactly. So why is there such a disconnect there?
I'm full of contradictions, and I don't know
well,
why.
everybody is,
right? Yeah. So it drives me crazy.
Was it because you felt like you were in a safer environment in a band that you could like express more, I guess, opinions, for lack of a better term?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a way, I think that's true.
Yeah.
I'm there. Literally, my brother was in my band with me, so it was
we're together and we all share this view, whether it's straight edge or whatever. And, I guess, it is a contradiction because in my personal life, I'm just kind of, I guess it's just a nervousness of putting anything on record.
Of course, yeah. That, to me, that's symptomatic of existing, obviously, before, people documenting their lives like how they are now.
Yeah.
Like that sometimes it comes naturally for people, and then there are times my wife is a perfect example in the fact, like, she's a high school English teacher. She's literally not on one social network. Right. And primarily because she, like you, is just like, I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
Like, she clearly doesn't need to do it for her profession.
Sure.
But it's that, and she constantly is just like, I don't get why you are interested in that, Ray. I'm like, well, I mean, clearly, like, I'm an outgoing person. Yeah. It's so funny because it's like, I mean, in some of my first exposures to you was, I mean, like, what you were doing musically and everything like that was like when Chris Logan first signed Taken to Goodfellow, and then it was I want to say it was either shortly before or shortly after you got, like, he decided to put out Disciple stuff.
Yeah,
I think it was before. Yeah. Like, he signed you guys before us. And I just remember, because this was in the day and age where obviously, like, the internet wasn't as, it was in its infancy, but there was such a dividing line where it's like, here is this guy, Chris Logan, who is like a devout atheist, like, has expressed it. What is he doing working with, like, a Christian hardcore band? Yeah. I just remember that being such a thing of wow, like, that's sending ripple effects.
Yeah, right.
And I presume that was, like, one of the reasons why you guys wanted to, like, take that step and work with him?
For sure. Because we didn't really like the whole... Well, first of all, when we started our band, it was sort of a natural desire, like, calling it a Christian band or whatever.
Right.
There wasn't really a precedent set for that. We knew of No Innocent Victim. There was some West Coast.
Sure.
But there was nothing on the East Coast. And we didn't think, hey, this is a niche or any kind of thing like that. We just thought, we're straight edge. Mm-hmm. Here's what we all happen to believe. And this band is all about what we believe. It wasn't like, let's label this or anything.
This is calculated, yeah.
Right.
We're fitting into a market here.
Right. Because there was no market, and I couldn't imagine that it would ever keep growing.
It's funny you mentioning that right now. It never really even occurred to me because, like, the Northeast in general, like, I can't literally think of a band, like, especially in that era, that was espousing Christianity and all.
Right.
Like, it was West Coast or the South.
Right. And that was it. And so we didn't want or even think about having an audience in that world.
Sure.
Later, when we went and played Cornerstone and we saw it growing with tooth and nail.
Oh, this is a thing. Yeah.
We were like, whoa. And we deliberately said, we appreciate that this exists and it's kind of cool. But this isn't what we do or where we're from, and we wanted to consciously not do that.
Right.
Even Face Down Records, which was kind of starting at the time,
right.
It wasn't a thing that, let's get on Face Down Records because they're Christians and we're Christians. We were more like, let's, when we saw Chris Logan, and he was, he's gone on record several times, saying that, you're one of my favorite bands, and this is my favorite release, and it always just blows me away that he says that.
Right.
Because signing us is one thing, like you said, the ripple effect. Like, whoa, he's willing to give them a voice on his label. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. But to have him actually like it, is another thing.
Yeah, totally. And be like, in the complete opposition of, like, what a band stands for. But it's like, I just love the idea that you can peel this away and be like, ideas can be expressed in no matter what form, within, especially independent music, where it's like, you shouldn't be muzzled.
Right. And I love that. And that's what I loved about hardcore from the beginning.
Right.
Is someone could say something that you totally disagree with, but you admire their passion for doing it.
Right.
And just that, media of doing that.
Right.
And that's what we are coming from is, we're not trying to have this, like, crazy agenda or anything, and let's just be who we are.
Right.
And unfilter it.
Sure. Yeah. You want to put out, I mean, especially when you're that age, you're not really thinking of, like, an honest representation of yourself. It's usually just like, it's reactionary.
Yeah.
You're just like, this is what we are.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm presenting the world.
Then later there's YouTube with a video of your early shows and you cringe and never look at,
Oh, totally, yeah. I don't know why you always think it's a good idea to film, like, your first couple shows.
I remember playing with Integrity and Erie at the Continental Ballroom, and it was the most amazing show.
Right.
And it was chaos, but that beautiful kind of chaos. and someone taped it, and we all went back to a show later, and we were like, oh, we're going to watch it. And I remember watching 5 minutes of it and saying, no, it was much, much better than that.
Right.
Just being so bummed. Like, I wish I had never seen it.
Right. I wish I could just act like that didn't happen in my own head, and that memory lives.
The experience was amazing.
Right.
You know, things were flying in the air, debris, people, you know, sneakers were flying all over the place. It was to the roof. And then on the video, it looked like, there's some commotion.
Yeah. Well, I guess it looks kind of tame.
Yeah, exactly.
So were you born and raised in because Erie, PA? Like, I mean, were you born and raised there?
Yes.
Or okay, because that's a steel town, correct? Or is that just like kind of a working class town? I've only honestly driven through there. I never played there.
Well, you know, back when I was growing up, GE was the heart of it. Kind of still is the only remaining factory kind of thing. But my dad worked at a paper mill called Hammer Mill, which should have X's on it, right? X Hammer Mill X.
Dude, I never. There's certain things. The hardcore, non-hardcore places that is totally
Hammer
true.
Mill. Like I wish I could go back and rename Disciple Hammer Mill.
Hammer Mill, that's perfect.
Right.
As an homage to your father. Like, hey, Dad, here we go.
Right. So they were a paper mill, and there was a plastics factory. So a lot of blue collar. I've heard it said that, you know, nothing is ever finished in Erie and marketed. Okay. It's only that middle step of being produced, and then it goes on to
shipped out
larger cities where it's, you know, marketed and put out to, you know.
Yeah.
So there's the paper, the plastic parts, all the stuff, and then it all goes on.
It all goes somewhere else. What was your family structure like? Like you mentioned, your brother's younger or older than you?
I'm the oldest. Okay. Then there's my brother, Dan, who's 3 years younger. Okay. Then Joel, who's younger than him, and then baby girl, Dan, 10 years younger than me.
Wow. So. They were like, we've had 3 boys. Yeah. We really have to try for a girl.
One last chance, yeah.
way too much testosterone in here. So did your mom work, or she primarily took care of you guys?
She took care of us until we were older, and then she started working. Okay. So now she works police and safety at a college. And,
nice.
Penn State, and yeah.
And so what was your, as you were growing up, the, you know, kind of formative years once you started to, like, you hit high school and that sort of stuff, you know, what kid did you find yourself being? Like, I mean, obviously an introvert, as we kind of...
Yeah. Skinny and short.
Okay.
Shy, quiet. My dad used to laugh and say, yeah, we went to your parent-teacher conferences, and they all say the same thing. Quiet, keeps to himself.
Right.
You know, and I thought, I wonder if that's me then.
Yeah.
You know, but definitely avoiding sitting in the back, not raising my hand, into Transformers, G.I. Joe.
Sure. The fantasy worlds that you could kind of create.
Yeah. Comic books, you know.
Okay.
Par for the course for that kind of kid, you know.
And I imagine sports were not on the...
Sports were not into it. I did play baseball, but it was kind of you know, my dad said, hey, you want to try baseball? And
yeah, of course.
I wasn't old enough yet to fear it, so I did it and learned to fear it. And then
totally, once you get hit by that first pitch, it's like, oh, that sucks.
Yeah, because, you know, there was the one kid from the one team who was, like, you know, heads and shoulders above all the rest of the kids. He was growing, hitting puberty, his voice was cracking. Yeah. And he was just whipping those balls so fast, and they were just erratic.
Yeah. Right.
And, you know, we'd play against that team. Oh, this is the team with, you know, Darren or whatever.
Right.
Darren was
that feeling. Right. You always have that sort of, like, the lore that's around certain, you know, sports in regards to, you know, your leagues, where it's like, oh yeah, dude, when you play that team, like, watch out for that kid. He's the phenom, and then you're terrified already.
Right, terrified. And you want to talk about blue collar city? My little league baseball team was called UE Local 506. Union team.
You guys are Teamsters,
yeah. Literally Teamsters.
You have no choice. Did spirituality and religion, like, play a part of your upbringing? Like, did your parents raise you to be that, or you chose it later, or how did that?
It's both. Okay. They raised us in it. We went to church whether we wanted to or not, kind of thing. And, you know, I daydreamed through the whole thing. And when you get older, you say, is this something I really believe, or is this where I kind of go, hey, thanks, Mom and Dad, that was a nice structure, but we're out of here.
Right. When did you hit that wall, as far as, like, you having to make that decision for yourself?
There wasn't a clear-cut moment.
Sure.
There was definitely, like
late high school, or like...
Yeah, there was a moment where it was, is this real? Okay, I think it is.
Right.
And then there's growing up and going to college, expanding your mind and all that sort of thing, and then saying again, is this real?
Yeah.
Like, what, you know, am I...
Once you're, I
find been drinking Kool-Aid? Have I,
totally.
Have I?
Once you're armed to ask those questions,
right?
That's when it's like, because you literally don't have the vocabulary to do it when you're younger, and then when you're armed with it, that's when you obviously should have those questions asked of yourself.
They're great. They're good questions. They're important questions. If you don't ask, then you're just kind of You're never going beyond that, because all children just believe what their parents say, which is good, because parents say, don't put your hand in the fire, that's going to hurt you.
Right.
And then later you kind of believe that.
Right. Yeah. You either learn by doing, or be like, oh no, I see why they say that.
Yeah. There's reasoning behind that. But then some of it you realize, hey, that's not really the way it is. Or
Right. They were just saying that to protect me, but there's something else out there.
Right.
And so when did music start to kind of infiltrate your life and be introduced?
Way early on. My family was musical, but in the church way. So my parents still do sing at church, special music. So they get up there and they'll sing to an accompaniment track. And that was always a thing. Where it was my parents sang all the time, but we didn't really listen to the radio or any of that kind of stuff. So
you were dabbling in the secular music world, right?
Right. Yeah. So then when I heard MTV was the whole, just like millions of people, and Huey Lewis in the News.
Yeah.
And I saw that and I thought, oh, I like this.
Yeah, this is good. Right. This is not like what I've heard for the past 5 years of my life.
Yeah, Huey Lewis in the News, that was like, hardcore indie music to me.
Of course. Yeah, cutting edge.
Right. I remember just that desire of like, how can I get this? Mm-hmm. And a cassette was $10, and $10 might as well have been, $500 to me.
Right.
We're talking 1985.
Mm-hmm.
And I just coveted getting that album,
Right.
And then and I want to go back and find out why and how this happened.
Mm-hmm.
But one day at school, after probably wanting to get that cassette for 6 months to a year. And, just that isn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. Just watch MTV when my parents are gone and hope for I want a new drug to come on or something.
Sure.
And then in the morning announcements for school, they just said, would Dave Quiggle and Laura such and such come down to the office? Uh-huh. Okay, come down to the office. And a lady said, what music would you like? And I said, and it was almost like, I almost just blurred, like Christmas Story, football.
Yeah, football.
Yeah, football.
Yeah, the pressure order.
Right. It was, I can't believe this. Am I dreaming? Like someone's just saying, do you want this? I don't know if it was like a music public school initiative kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I said, Huey Lewis in the News, sports for sure. And then, a week later it was come down to the office again and they gave it to me. Nothing to sign, nothing to...
That's so weird.
Nothing to join. It was like...
it wasn't like Columbia House or anything.
It was like the heavens said, he must have this.
Right. This is a presentation.
He's wanted this for too long.
Did it happen to other people at the school, like other friends and stuff? Or...
Yeah, because my one friend, she wanted Purple Rain, and then her parents were like, no.
That's incredible.
Yeah, she got Purple Rain, and
and then got immediately taken away.
Immediately, just like, no. So,
Wow, that's so weird. That is literally like, divine inspiration. Like that could not mean any other thing.
Yeah, I wonder, I'm sure if I went back to that school and asked, they would just look at me like, that's stupid. No, we wouldn't do that. Or those people are long gone and I don't know.
Right.
But it must have been, all I can imagine is it's something they were trying, like, getting kids
interested
in a music is getting them off the streets kind of thing.
No, totally. Yeah.
So maybe it was that. I don't know why it'd be so random.
Right.
Why me?
Right.
They heard I wanted that. I made it known that I wanted that.
Right. It was clear. Yeah. Dave really wants that record. I guess we'll try to give it to him.
So, of course I played that album out and then got into, I think The Outfield was the next, next cassette on the list. And,
sure.
And then everything like most people who get into hardcore, it just gets heavier and heavier. So
right. You just started desiring
metal.
Sure.
Thrash. Amazing.
So once you're especially what I always find interesting is when you're raised in a spiritual context, like once you start to try to desire things that are obviously like not of your parents' approval, how did that all start to transpire? Where they were like, oh my gosh, Dave is turning up wrong.
Well, as you can imagine, Huey Lewis in the News was not a problem.
Right.
My dad was safe. My dad was like, awesome.
Yeah.
hey, we're a family trip. Why don't you pass that Huey Lewis and the News cassette up?
Sure.
And we listened.
No controversy here.
No problem. But then when it started to get into other things, I remember my parents sat down with me and were like, let's listen to what you're listening to. And it was kind of good for them because they weren't just like, no.
Oh, that's good.
They were like, let's check this out with you. And they were like, oh, okay, well, this has a lot of,
questionable themes or lyrics or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
So heavily, sexualized or something. And just so you're aware of that. But then something happened later where, probably when I started getting into some harder music, there was a time where my mom just threw out all my music.
Really?
Yeah. Said, I'm sorry. I came home from school. I'm sorry. I just looked at all your music and it was,
Yeah.
It's probably stuff like Anthrax. And,
of course. Yeah, I definitely remember, when I first started to go into whatever Towers or whatever, and then looking at Cannibal Corpse records and just being like, dude,
dare I?
I know. I was like, I for sure know I'm not going to buy this, but it's just looking at the song titles where it's just like, oh yeah, entrails ripped from a virgin's cunt. I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And just not even being able to first of all understand what it means, but then second of all to just be like, oh, I think I need to bring this home. I was just like, I can only look at it from a distance.
Right. I don't think I would have dared to go that.
Oh no,
far,
yeah, that is that's push. Yeah, that's an extreme example,
yes.
But yeah.
But also, I think in the 80s, I think my parents had the right approach with, let's talk about what you're into.
Yeah,
let's be involved in it. That's awesome. That's what I try to do with being a parent. And
right. It didn't swing the other direction to where it was just like they were completely reactionary and didn't even have a conversation with you. Besides,
but in the 80s, it was all that fear mongering. Probably happens today too, just in a different way. But Dungeons and Dragons.
Of course,
you hear Dungeons and Dragons, and you're a parent in the 80s, and you think, oh, that means my son's going to go tie someone up in the woods, and
of course, yeah, and then kill himself afterwards. Right?
Yeah. And so there was all that fear. My parents were definitely taken to that side of things. They're great parents and all that, but a little nervous for their kids in a culture where they didn't know where things were going to go.
Right, and
now we look back at Twisted Sister and we're like, look at how silly. But at the time it was like, those people are going to harm my children.
Right, yeah, and it's also where it's just like, especially from the connotation that it's like, if you're receiving your input from one or two sources, it's like, it's hard to understand, because every single one of us now has 5 million things that we can figure out. Yeah. So it's like, if they're hearing from one or two things and they're both having the same message, then that'll be consistent. Oh yeah, this will corrupt my children.
Right. Yeah.
This is provable. Did you react badly to that once the hammer came down as far as all right, well, I'm going to push harder. I'm going to go farther away from...
Actually, no. That seems like that would be the next step.
Sure.
But my mom, and this is to her credit or blame, whichever way, said, I threw out your music. Because I did that, I'm sorry, but I'm going to buy you whatever you want from the Christian bookstore.
Wow.
Which I thought, no thank you, but I'll take it.
Right.
And, my mom wasn't doing it out of I hate your music and your choices, and so I didn't feel this need to rebel. I just kind of thought, this sucks.
Right.
But my mom's not a mean person, but this sucks what she did, and I'll take that option. So I bought a bunch of crappy. I tried to like it, but it was terrible. You know?
This is this is clearly a C-rate version of whatever it was I was listening to.
And so I went the way of, okay, I'm still going to buy Anthrax and Metallica, and I'm going to hide it under my bed now.
Sure.
Now it's going underground. It's hiding.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a while.
Okay.
Where it started, where I was like, I'm just going to have these 3 cassettes. That's all I need. All I need is Master of Puppets, Among the Living. And, it was just rationalizing.
Of course.
I won't let this get out of hand. I'm just going to have these,
I love that.
I can stop whenever I want.
Total drug addict.
Yeah. So I've got these under my bed, and I'm just going to, that's it. And then that grew to where it was an ocean of cassettes under my bed. To where it was like,
this is obvious.
Any minute. Any minute it's going to be pull back the mattress and just horror.
Yeah, it's. I just love the idea where it's typically, there could be pornography under there, and it's like, what are all these cassettes?
Yeah, what's all this music?
It's so good. Because when did Disciple start playing? Was that your first band?
No, I had a band before that. With some of the guys who went on to be in Disciple.
Okay.
And then my brother was in a hardcore band, all just local stuff. And and we were in these bands and had our...
Was that kind of in high school that you started to play in bands, or was it post-high school?
High school's when I got into hardcore and going to shows.
Okay.
I think it was between high school and college that I was like, I think I want to start a band.
Okay.
And my cousin Gary was in a band called Something to Prove.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Of course.
Something later, Brothers Keeper and stuff like that. So, you know, local stuff, and we considered Integrity and, you know, Despair. Because Erie, for anyone who doesn't know, is right in the middle.
Yeah.
So we have Pittsburgh, a couple hours south, you know, Ohio, or Cleveland, an hour and a half west, and then Buffalo. So, I mean, we were right in the middle where, you know, Despair was coming down all the time, Slugfest, and Integrity was coming over all the time. So this was our local...
Right. It was so interesting to see that scene specifically just get focused on. Like, I mean, honestly, in the same way that, like, to a lesser extent, but like, you know, like Louisville or whatever. It's like once these cities kind of started to pop up where it was like, you either saw why it happened, or with Erie where you were like, oh, that's the middle. Like that was on the way to other things. So I guess that we can stop off here because there are bands here. So I guess we can kind of play. So it was, I'm sure it was cool from your guys' perspective because it was like, you were able to exist in a scene, but in a town that isn't so like over inundated with, you know, stuff in general. Right.
Yeah. It had a bigger hardcore scene than Pittsburgh.
Right.
Know? And Pittsburgh is just
a
much larger city. And I feel like a lot of that is due to the local bands, like, you know, Mike Ski and Something Approved starting, and there were a lot of other ones. I'm trying to think of the rest, but, you know, all these local bands. Abnegation was
that's right.
And I think because we had the local thing growing.
Right.
I mean, there was a time when Disciple played and Hatebreed came out, and it was the first Satisfaction on Victory. Satisfaction, Death of Desire. And it just came out, wasn't fully recognized
realized
yet. But it just came out, but they had a huge following with their demo and stuff like that, their 7-inch and all their comps. It was a Hatebreed Disciple show in Erie. And I remember being so excited to see Hatebreed, you know, in my hometown, and we get to play with Hatebreed.
Right,
and this is before Hatebreed's Hatebreed, you know.
Yeah.
And they came and they played, and we played right before them, as is proper.
Right.
And it was the biggest show ever, you know, 500 plus kids, stage dives, insanity. And then after Disciple played, it cut down to about half.
Oh, dude.
And I was embarrassed for my city, and, you know, but then also thinking, wow, this is very strange that local is placed, in Erie, is placed higher than national.
Right.
And a lot of that must have been just because of, you know...
Yeah, just because of the I mean, especially too from I'm sure there was a lot of kids that were into you guys specifically because, you know, you were a local band. And there's always that sense of pride, like, even though you probably don't recognize it when you're 14 or 15 years old, but you're just like, oh, this is like an untouchable band, and they're from like right down like, this is amazing.
Right. Yeah, you invest in the things that are yours, you know. And
totally.
Hatebreed wasn't theirs.
Wasn't theirs, right?
Later, you know, years later, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was everybody's.
Hatebreed can come in and destroy, you know. At that time, I remember thinking, Hatebreed's going to, you know, they're headlining as they should. They're going to destroy.
Right.
And then when it diminished the amount of people in the crowd, I thought, this is insane.
Right.
I don't understand this.
Yeah,
this doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
And at that time, we had traveled, so we were out of our local...
You had a sense of what it was proper. And,
exactly.
Why did you even want to play bands to begin with? Because obviously, as we have spoken about before, it's like the idea of, you know, getting up there in front of people, like, you know, I'm sure that was terrifying to you.
Yeah, but I think it happened so gradually. Like, you know, we never had lofty goals because there weren't really that many bands. Yeah,
you didn't have a blueprint, right?
Right. And so we thought, it'd be great. We'll play 50 of our friends, and it'll be fun.
Okay, yeah.
When you're starting with that mentality, you're not afraid of that.
Sure.
And then when it grows, it's natural and it creeps in. There was never that, like, suddenly it's 50, suddenly it's
stage
500,
fright. Sure.
And like, ooh. And so I was never nervous to play in a band, which is opposite.
right.
Yeah.
What college did you go to? Did you get
Edinburgh?
Okay. Yeah. And you got a degree from there?
Yeah.
Okay.
In fine arts.
You know, one of the other loves, or your primary source of income. So did art creep in like during high school, and like when you were creating these sort of like fantasy worlds of all the stuff you were playing with when you were younger?
Well, yeah, it was always drawing.
Sure.
You know, like most artists. You know, I always say, and I'm sure a lot of people say this, but all children have a knack for drawing.
Yeah.
But then children grow out of it.
Right, of course.
The ones who don't are artists.
Right,
you know?
right. You've got no choice but to keep drawing.
Yeah, and so I've always done that. And then when starting a band, even with starting a band, it wasn't even my first thought, like, oh, now I'll get to do art for my band. I thought, I'm going to get a real artist to do this.
Sure.
So even Disciples for 7-inch, you know, I was like, I'm not qualified for this.
Yeah.
And so Mike Ski did our, you know.
Sure. That was the one with like the lion and the
Scarab 7-inch.
Exactly.
With the lion on there,
Of course, yeah.
You know,
usually you have your one guy in the band that obviously has some sort of graphical talent, and that's just like out of like function. Like there's like, I guess I'll do this.
Right.
Like I'll figure this out.
It was, everything was very natural, and I was reluctant to do it all. You know what I mean?
Right.
I guess I'll. It was the whole time. There was never this driving force.
Sure.
I mean, I had the creative driving force.
Yeah.
But I never wanted to be like, I'm going to do all the art for it, and I'm going to write the songs. It was always, I thought someone else would write the songs. And I'll just play guitar.
And so it's interesting because I always find it's like, you know, when you have something like, you know, being an artist, and then obviously you have the other side of playing in a band. Like, you know, did you feel like you wanted to be, you know, the music dude or the art dude? Obviously, because you were going to school for it, I'm sure the art was more of a real world application to it. But, you know.
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, now, okay, I get emails from, you know, college graduates or kids going into college that are like, how do I get to do what you do? And I thought, I didn't plan on doing what I did. Well, even when I was going to college for art, I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do art in the music business.
Right.
Because I didn't, other than Pusshead,
right?
Who do I look to?
Sure.
You know what I mean? At that time. And so I kind of thought, oh, you know, I'll do a comic book. I'll self-publish a comic book. And my hardcore stuff here, this is for fun and, you know, for the passion of doing it. And, you know, doing it in the summers. And it was
when it was convenient, right? Right.
Yeah, we would do weekends during college. And when college was out, I'd work at Kmart third shift for half the summer until tour. And then I'd, you know.
Yeah, see you later job.
Get in a van.
Right.
Yeah. And it was never a long-term plan, you know.
Sure.
And art, I never thought the two would marry and actually,
Would and so were your parents concerned about your choices in regards to like, oh, Dave's gonna be an artist and he's doing all this music? Like, dude, this is terrifying.
Not really. I would get my dad saying, you know, we'd show up at home, me and my brother, because, you know, both in the band, show up at home.
That's a 1-2 punch for them. Yeah. They're just like, oh, they're both in it.
Yeah, they're both being dragged down. And, you know, we'd show up just to grab pillows or something and throw them in a van, and my dad would be like, all right, you guys got your college locked down? You guys, you know, you're going to college, you're doing student loans. I hope you're not, you know, going off doing the band thing and to the dismay of...
Right.
You know, your education. And we'd all, Dad, no, we're doing it all. Don't worry, you know.
Yeah.
But that's it. You know, they never were freaking out or any of that kind of thing, you know.
That's good.
Just mild parental concern.
I
would have the same concern.
Yeah. You know? I mean, I think it's just completely reactionary because it's like obviously the connotation is that you always want better for your children. And so it's like when they see all this stuff that they don't understand, no matter how much you obviously consider, you could have probably sat down with them for, you know, 48 hours straight and been like, here's all this, and they still would be like, yeah, it still doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that sort of happened. I remember always having that argument or conversation with my dad, like, you know, don't worry, we're focusing on this and this and that, and then the band only takes up this much time and and it's actually a practice every week is a good diversion, you know, and he would, by the end of the conversation, he'd go, I can see that. No, I trust you. I know you've got the balance. Yeah. And then 2 weeks later, we'd run in to grab stuff to go out on the road again.
Right.
Oh, man, I hope you're really giving your...
Right.
You know, it was like he forgot everything that we discussed. And
I got used to it. Yeah. And there's I always love the discussions I had with my mom in particular, where it was like, you know, going on tour. Like, that's such a... Like, I don't care how old you... Well, I mean... Specifically when you're, you know, in the late teens, early 20s, of just like, what do you mean you're going on tour? Like, you're just sleeping, like, sleeping on people's floors. Like, it's such a, like, I still, like, probably like you do with your parents, where it's like, I gave my mom so much credit to just be like, he'll be okay out there.
And they did.
Right.
My parents were great in so many respects to that, where they were like, okay, we got to just trust. I mean, part of that is they had 4 kids.
Right.
And, like, I only have one daughter.
Right.
And me and my wife have to confer every now and then, like, okay, you know, we got to let her get away with some stuff. or else that's
right.
not going to
All of our attention is paid to this one child.
Right.
So
because I got away with so much just because my mom was chasing around the little ones, and I was like, I guess I'll just go do what I,
Right.
And so with having 4 kids, you have to just say, we trust them. We raised them as far as we could, and now hopefully they don't ruin everything.
Right. We hopefully gave them some sort of building blocks where it's like, hopefully they'll be able to make right decisions as they move on.
So as much as my mom threw out comic books and music and stuff, they never really were the kind of parents that we wanted to rebel against.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think if parents are just smoking a cigarette while they're saying, if you ever smoke, I'm going to knock that right out of your mouth while they smoke. That's the kind of parents you rebel against.
Of course.
You're like, that doesn't make sense, and I'm mad about it.
Yeah.
But I always thought, my parents, they just love us. They just worry. They don't understand, but how could they?
Right.
I don't expect them to understand hardcore. Like my dad's like, oh yes, counterculture, subcultures, yes.
I got a beat on that.
Yeah, enjoy that.
And so then the amount of recognition that obviously Disciple received when they were around was great, and then recognition that you started to receive as an artist. Like, when did you start to feel like people started to take what you did seriously from an artistic perspective?
Good question. Like everything else, it was organic in nature, where I was doing the artwork for my own bands and then friends' bands. So it was never quite my own band and then a national selling band where I had to go, oh, this is big. Yeah. It was my band, my friend's band, my friends of friends' bands. Oh, I guess I'm doing bands' artwork now.
Right. Yeah.
Looks like that just kind of happened.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I think with the internet, and the connectivity with that, and seeing, people come in from all over instead of just locally. Right. And, that sort of thing, you'd be like, oh, someone in Omaha wants me to draw a logo for them? Neat. Right. They're from Omaha. That's crazy. Yeah. Where now you wouldn't think anything of that. Right. Because
what I find interesting about your art, too, is the fact that it's like, you so clearly obviously have like your identity in regards to like who you are, what it is that you create, like no matter what, like that voice will always be represented. But it's cool that it's obviously permeated across, like, because you've worked with so many different projects that have literally no connection to independent culture in any capacity, but it still has your voice. And so it's like, that's a hard transition to like make and to be able to capture. Has that been something that you've had to like grow accustomed to? Have you had to like say no to jobs where you're just like, I don't feel comfortable with doing that sort of like whatever I'm being asked to?
If I can't see it in my mind, then I ask myself, okay, am I just being lazy? Right. But then if I can't see it like applying to it, like recently Disney, right? And I don't know how that happened. Yeah. There are, people like, oh, how did you get hooked up with Disney? Don't know. Right. Don't know.
Someone emailed me.
Yeah. Someone emailed me. And then when I asked later, why did you email me? Because if you look at my work up till the Disney stuff, there's nothing that relates really.
Yeah, totally.
But somebody over there just thought, hey, this would be fun.
This is a good art. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I had to ask myself first, like, okay, this is an opportunity. Obviously, I should do it. Right. But should I do it?
Yeah. You're like, business-wise, it makes sense. Yeah. But artistically, like, would I be able to do myself with this?
Right. Sure. Like, how could I not want to play with that property? Like, oh, you get to play with Mickey Mouse. Yeah. And do whatever you want.
Not interested, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I just can't. I can't connect that with my visual aesthetic.
I can't put X's on his hand. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Totally.
And and with Disney, it's a very like they want edgy but Disney edgy, which isn't edgy.
No, yeah. It's pushing, but it's ever so slightly. Right. Yeah. Right. It's French vanilla as opposed to vanilla.
And so I had to really ask myself, like, can I do something that I would, and I don't spend too much time thinking if someone looked at this would they know it was mine. Yeah. But I do want to be able to do something different, not just hey I drew Mickey Mouse.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to put your own twist, but not to the point of where it's just like a character of what you already create on your own. Right. And then the what precipitated the move to California? Like, what brought you out here? Because by that Disciple was done by that point, or were you guys still?
we played our last show in 2004. Okay. Not because of any breakup, but just because we thought it's time.
The natural. Yeah. It ran its course.
Yeah, it ran its course. We're all involved in other things. It's still fun, and we went out having a good time.
Yeah, once you had to put the AD on it, I mean, that was just...
Yeah. Once our band name resembled a license plate, then that was...
Yeah, once legal properties came into play, it's like, oh, okay, I guess, It's run its course.
Okay, we'll do X disciple X AD, but we're taking a stand on not adding one more.
Right.
All right, to the second power. Fine.
Yeah.
But we stopped doing disciple, and then by that time I was doing full-time freelance artwork.
Okay.
Because there was a time where I was working a day job, doing the freelance.
Okay.
And then I took the plunge with like, can I do freelance?
What were you doing in the day job as you were doing, like, as you were trying to build up?
It was a .com startup.
Okay.
That was like, they had masseuses.
In Erie?
In Erie, yeah.
Oh, wow.
They bought everything in Erie that was of value. We had a, masseuse there every week.
Man.
It was just like you read about it.
Right.
With
just
the
like
.com
Silicon Valley. Right.
You could buy stock in the company.
Right.
And I was learning web development.
Okay.
So the very little bit I know about HTML I learned there. Mm-hmm. But mainly I got paid to learn how to use a Wacom tablet and draw and use Photoshop and stuff I was doing, a continuation of college.
Wow.
And when that kind of, like all the .coms did, just crashed.
Right.
I thought, well, why not now? And so I tried doing it, and so I was doing freelance full time, and Face Down Records was a big client. So
sure.
Even though I wasn't an employee of Face Down at the time, I was still doing...
You were essentially kind of the in-house artist, so to speak. Yeah,
right, exactly. And I had been growing pretty tired of the winters there.
Sure.
The winters in Erie, they're worse because of Lake Erie.
Right.
Lake effect hardcore.
Sure, yeah.
The lake effect snow dropped so much snow that, in growing up, you don't think anything of it. It's just how it is.
Right.
But when you tour and you go all around the world...
Oh, there's nicer places.
You mean it's like this all the time?
Right.
You mean these streets are dry like this in this month?
Right. I don't need to put a bunch of salt on you.
Right. And it broadens, it expands your vision for where you can live. And
right.
I'm sure that explains why a lot of people do live all over the country now.
Right.
I notice that a lot of people, they don't stay and raise families in the town they grew up in anymore.
Totally.
And I had been coming to California for Face Down Records things. We had a tour with No Innocent Victim in '98 where we became great friends with No Innocent Victim, and Jason was just starting Face Down at the time, and we were having our first California burritos and In-N-Out Burger, all the staples of California life. And
sure,
once you taste those, it's what's the saying? Once they've seen the big city lights, how can you keep them down on the farm, kind of thing?
Right. You're like, I need to be there.
Right. And so every blizzard, first week in April, and there's still a blizzard, and it was depressing me.
Sure.
Getting to where, looking back, I probably had that seasonal affective disorder thing. But
sure.
At the time, I didn't think I did, but
right, you're in the middle of it.
Yeah. I never recognize it when I'm in it, and it was bumming me out. And then it just seemed like a natural thing where Jason was like, hey, he'd call me up about an album and be like, yep, just here in sunny California,
of course,
just enjoying it, because he wanted me to move out here.
Okay.
And then we were talking one time, and I said, if you ever do expand to where you could hire me for real and move me out here, I would do it. And he said, oh, I didn't know that was an option. Let's do that. And so then
So that was just, you're like, this is an opportunity.
Yeah, my wife and my 2-year-old daughter, and we came out here, and we've been here for almost 10 years.
Okay. Oh, and so you had established the family in...
Yeah, which was the hard part, because we had the only grandchild at the time.
Right.
And both my wife and I had family in Erie, so the full grandparents, the whole 9 yards was all in Erie. Easy, convenient, local, wonderful. And we love our family, so it wasn't like we had this crazy family life.
Yeah, you're like, I can't get away. Right, yeah. I can't wait to get away.
Because some people I've talked to assume that, you moved, your family's crazy. I'm like, no, my family's awesome. I miss them all the time.
Yeah.
I just couldn't be happy with. I'm a visual person,
right?
And so when you go out and you look out your window and the sky is just white, no
you're
blue,
like, again, right.
no clouds.
Sure,
the trees don't have leaves.
Right.
There's. The snow gets plowed on the side of the road where it eventually turns black from all the car exhaust, so you've got black snow.
Sure.
White skies, dead trees.
Not very inspiring.
It's not inspiring, right?
Sure.
It's the opposite of that.
Yeah, it is the opposite.
Inspiring?
Right. Demotivating, all the above. Yeah. And then obviously, like, tattooing is also a part of your life as well. But it seems like, the way that you build that is like, that's just like literally a vacation for you, in the sense of where it's like, I can kind of do that just to like, either the thing I find about tattooing is so cool is that the conversations that you have usually with your artists, like as you're like doing, if you're doing like a larger piece, do you like that sort of like interaction, or are you pretty like locked in when you're tattooing a person?
I actually, another contradiction. I love it.
Yeah.
I love sitting down with someone I don't know, or even people I've known for a while where you have a history with them, but even people you don't know, and just you start tattooing them, and they're forced to sit there. You're forced to sit there. Let's find out about each other, or what,
Sure.
And normally I would think that I wouldn't like that.
Right.
But I love it.
Yeah.
I happen to meet so many good people. A lot of them become real life friends after, tattooing them a few times, Right. That's how I met Chris Hansen, who I was a friend of yours.
Yeah.
He came down, and he's been coming down here for years now, getting tattooed. And
no, it's definitely, it's something that you, a lot of people that just like maybe have one or two tattoos, they just, it's whatever. They go into a tattoo shop and pick something off the wall.
And done,
And then, but there's such a bond that is created with people that, it's like, I'm literally displaying what you want on your body. Yeah. And but it's my art. It's that weird, it's that weird trade-off. But then it's like, you're just intrinsically connected with that person for the rest of your life. You're like, well, this is what I got. This is what we got going on.
Right.
And the last thing I want to hit on was the idea that obviously, like we were talking about earlier, where it's like, you have a family, you have such a rich history within the context of counterculture and like all the connotations that go along with it. Because it's like, and what I find interesting about your experience too is the fact that it's like, within punk and hardcore, Christianity is so maligned. It's still, they're from a larger sense of the term. To where it's like, it still blows my mind that it's like, in 2014, that you still have people that's like, oh yeah, like religion should have no place within independent music. And I'm just like, that's something I heard in like 97.
And I've always understood that. Even when people said that to us when we were starting out.
Sure.
Religion shouldn't be part of this. We thought, well, we're separating religion from the passion of what we believe that happens to be in that religion. It is not the same thing, because we're not saying, go to church.
Sure.
That's not our message. Go to church and believe these things so you can be one of us, kind of thing.
Right.
This is just a reflection of our hearts and our feelings of how we look at the world around us.
Right.
And it's flavored by, you could say religion, but it's more of a faith.
Sure. The relationship that you have.
So sometimes, in certain contexts, I would tend to believe or agree with somebody when they would say religion has no place. I'd be like, well, religion, sure. Because religion isn't music.
Sure.
So,
Right.
I'd be like, plumbing has no place in hardcore. You're right, because plumbing is about toilets and and sinks, and
good
hardcore
point.
Isn't about that kind of
very
thing.
Good point. Right. You can't relate those two. Yeah.
So I'd have to agree something like, religion, like going to church and following rules, that doesn't have a place in hardcore. So on that, I do agree.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And so the tying up all those experiences, and then the fact that, you're raising a family and you have this, like, the thing that continually scares me, I have a 3-year-old, and the idea of, like, what is he going to bring home that I'm not going to understand? Like, but it's just weird because, like, we shove so much stuff in our heads.
Yeah.
That I don't know, like, whatever he like, your daughter or my son could, all of a sudden be super into like Insane Clown Posse, but we'll know, like, we'll be like, okay, I know what you're gonna do. You want some Faygo, like. We'll have, but like, whereas our parents, they would be like, "Oh my gosh!"
Yeah.
So like, is there any like, I wouldn't say fear, but is there any sort of just like, wow, this is weird because I know so much of this, like, subculture stuff, and like, where will that end up?
Yeah. Well, people would say, to me and my wife, oh, your daughter's so lucky she has you guys as parents because you're quote unquote
right. You're cool, right.
And I always say the same thing. Hippies who had kids thought, man, my kid's lucky to have us because we're not like my old man.
Right.
We're cool. And
I named my kid Jupiter. Right?
Yeah. And the kid turns out to be Alex P. Keaton.
Right. No, totally. Yeah. Oh, they're going to be a Wall Street banker. Right.
So I almost expect my daughter to get into something that is something I don't understand instead of something I do understand. Because you always think, you think like, oh, I'm the be-all, end-all of, I know culture.
Yeah.
But then again, that being said, our culture is so different now. it's not just what's in the culture that's different, but the whole culture is different because we're so invested in pop culture and knowing all these subgroups of types of music or film or, you know, where back then it was, you know, my dad was like, yeah, Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry, that's my pop culture or whatever. And all this other stuff in music. Oh yeah, I've heard of the Clash, and that's the limit.
That's where it ends.
Yeah. But nowadays, you know, parents like us, we are invested in like, oh, what's out there, and I want to know all this stuff.
Right.
So I guess it's anyone's.
I know
it's
completely unpredictable, but yeah, it will be very interesting. Like I almost predict that it's like it's going to swing in a sort of like the movie Pleasantville, where it's like it's that sort of like, oh, we're gonna basically we're as a culture are going to go back to some of these sort of, you know, for lack of a better term, like puritanical beliefs. Where it's like, you know, we'll be so kind of like middle of the road, and like not in a bad way, just a reaction to what has already kind of happened. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how it transpires in the next 10 to 15 years.
Because everything, you're right, everything when you look back as a cycle in history is a reaction.
Totally.
So there's always, when things get just loose and, you know, super free, then it always reins back in, and it's like, you know, Reagan years kind of thing. And then after the Reagan years, then there's the, we're free.
Then there's the release, right?
Yeah.
No, totally. And the last thing I want to hit on was the idea of, you know, the grind of being kind of, you know, the freelancer, where, you know, does that weigh on you still, or do you feel like you have a stable enough base to where you feel, you obviously feel comfortable? Because there's always going to be that, that fear of like, well, I am my own business. Like I'm all in on this. Does that stuff sort of, you know, still enter your head, or is it like you just kind of keep your head down and focus on the work?
That's more the keep your head down, focus on the work, but the other, you know, the voice that says, oh, you better say yes to this project because it could be your last, that's there, but it fades.
That's good.
And plus, I've really kind of hedged my bets pretty well because I work for Face Down Records,
right,
in almost I guess permanent.
Sure.
I don't know what to call it. Like
maybe I'm like a permanent
like
consultant.
payroll. Yeah. Like I'm not freelance.
Right.
So I get a flat amount of I get a paycheck for that.
Sure.
And it's not dependent on what I do, just the hours I put in.
Sure.
And obviously what I do in those hours. But so I work 3 days for him. That's sort of like a base. Almost like how a restaurant server makes a certain base, but then tips.
Sure.
And so I have that as kind of a stable foundation, and then I do freelance for 2 days a week on top of that, and then tattooing. So it's kind of, if any one of these branches die, then I just put all that energy in 2 other branches. Right.
And
so,
dude, that's that's like so symptomatic of people like in independent music in general, where it's just like, because everybody does like a million things, and not in like, I always say where it's like, it's not out of function for like, you know, financial gain. A lot of it is just because it's fun to do stuff where you're like, oh, like that's a cool opportunity. Why would I not do that?
Oh yeah. I know it's hard, and it's challenging to say no to things.
Totally.
You know, I mean, you have to. You just have to, because otherwise you'll spread yourself so thin that none of those areas that you work in will be effectual.
Sure.
You know, so I try to limit it. There are times where I'm like, tattooing's got to go. I got to quit tattooing. Right. And so I'll back off for a month or so, and then, no, I miss it. I got to get back.
Right.
And I'll just, you know, something else. And I've experimented with those 3 things: face down, freelance, and tattooing. Yeah. I've experimented with, what if I put more,
like 80% here, 10% here. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Back to Dungeons and Dragons. It's like building a character. You only have so many points you can spend: agility, strength, endurance. Right. But you can't be good at all.
Totally. Yeah. I have to. I am all in on. I got to have a lot of hit points. Magic points. I'm not going to concentrate on right now.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I really appreciate you hanging out, Dave. This has been fun for me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So there you go. There's Dave Quiggle. Such a sweet dude, right? I love it. And I realize when I am talking on the microphone, you don't see this, obviously, because it's a auditory medium. I am moving my hands. Like, I'm literally moving my left hand right now, acting like I am talking to a person in front of me. If I put my hands out on my lap, I feel like I'm insecure. I don't know what to do with my hands. Is there a Weaker Than song like that? Yeah, I think so. Anyways, the producer, as always, is Tom Richfield. thank you so much for your awesomeness and your continued devotion to the show and the podcast medium in general. propertyofzach.com. Visit the website 100wordspodcast.com. Email the show and just interact. I've been getting a lot of feedback from people who are like, hey, I just checked out the show, and it's awesome. More and more people are listening to this, and this is a great thing. And subscribe to the show. Don't screw around. You'll get every single episode delivered to you. Whether or not you listen to it, it helps the show when you download the show. So it adds to numbers, and it helps out. So subscribe to the show. The guest next week, for those of you that listen this far, is Brandon Chipetti. He is the vocalist for now defunct band called Bleeding Through. He also played for 18 Visions. I have a long history with him. We talk about that. And he also is the owner of a gym called Rise Above Fitness. Very in-depth and revealing chat in a way that, honestly, I was nervous going into this one. So anyways, that's a big enough tease. So until next week, be safe, everybody.